history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome to another episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. This is such an awesome show, and I'm having a great time doing it. I, of course, am your host, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I'm your other host, Sid Bolton, otherwise known as Dirk the Daring.
And you are our gaming archaeologist, don't forget.
I know, I do forget that sometimes.
It's such a great title.
It is, that's true, it is. Because
you should be like, I am your gaming archaeologist, Sid Bolton, and be just like, that's it. That's who I am.
I'm wearing the hat with the lights on it, and I'm digging up the lost treasures of gaming for you every week.
Except this week.
Well, we did dig up a lost treasure in a sense.
We
did. Just didn't have a matching interview to go with it. And that's going to happen, I think, throughout the show. It is sometimes really tough to come up with a lost treasure and then find a person associated with that lost treasure and be able to work their schedule with our schedule. It's actually a lot more difficult than I think people might realize, but that's okay.
And we've been actually very, very fortunate that the last 6 weeks we've had a guest every week. I mean, it's worked out really well. And, you know, the nature of this kind of show being an interview show, we're not going to have a developer guest every week, and that's just going to happen. So there might be a few weeks here and there where we don't have a show, and that's okay.
That's okay.
But we do have a show this week.
We do.
Because, as everybody knows, since we started, a friend of the show, Fred Rojas, and Gaming History 101, has been doing Twitch streams of the games that we cover every Friday night. And he's been doing an awesome job on it.
Yes.
So I figured, you know what? Since we couldn't shake down a developer and say, get in here with us, I thought, let's talk to Fred. He's got his Gaming History 101 site. He does a Twitch stream for us. So why not talk to him, right? Well, let's get him on here and see what he's doing. So that's what we're doing this week. We're going to talk to Fred. So without further ado, let's talk to him. Fred, thank you for coming to Lost Treasures of Gaming and bailing us out this week.
Well, thank you guys very much for having me. I'm actually honored to be on. As a incessant listener, it's an honor to be on here.
Awesome. Incessant listener.
Yes.
How long have you been waiting to use that word?
Oh, probably 15, maybe 20 years now.
Well, is that word related to incest, though? Is it because you're part of our show, maybe? You're related to the show?
Wow.
That was a bad joke.
Now we're going to get into the origins of words.
Well, we are digging up lots of things this week. Apparently, it's not gaming stuff. It's old word history.
Oh, that's okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
New show.
New show.
I mean,
You've got enough shows, Sean.
In the classic vein of Gaming History 101, to me, incessant means somebody who is constantly persistent. And I love your show because I am fascinated by video game development as a whole.
That's awesome. Yeah, and of course you do Gaming History 101. So what is the history, no pun intended, behind that site, and how long have you been doing it?
Sure. We're getting on 4 years now. I say I did found the site, and I was the only writer and producer of content for about a year, but then I started to slowly get a team together. But I did start it off as exactly what it sounds like. It was supposed to be like an intro course to the history of games. And I kind of talk about it in some earlier stuff. Nowadays it's become a little bit more of a blog. So kind of the best way to do it would either be to search for you can go in the search box for the website and put in lessons, or you can do gaminghistory101.com/lessons, and you'll see some of those. But I started it off basically discussing the challenge facing gaming history because it's not very well documented, especially in the United States, where a decent amount of history did happen. And also, just to inform people, so like we have early on I have a lot of genre studies that kind of discuss like the evolution of the JRPG or the shooter, the shmup, you know, and various other things. I think I did one for the platformer. And since then, it's kind of become more of a blog-like thing because I've learned, as I'm sure you guys are aware, that your audience is very interested in seeing things covered that maybe they're interested in. So as they start engaging with you, you tend to go off on side tangents and you start getting into your own projects. And so it started to become somewhat of a service on demand, which is kind of where we're at now. But on the same note, I was pushing about 10 articles a month. Now we're doing about 35.
Wow.
So, yeah. Now that also includes video and podcasts, so I'm cheating a little bit. But we do provide at least once, sometimes twice a week, a video, a podcast, and then where we can, we fill it in with articles. But it seems reading has become the least popular of our traffic.
That's for sure. No, I mean, I see that even on my own site that just,
People don't want to read articles anymore, I'm finding. They want to listen to podcasts. They want to watch a video. They want to watch people Twitch streaming stuff, and that's just, sites like this, they go through that's what happens through the times. Like, things evolve. And now it's all about the YouTube channels and the Twitch streaming.
Yep, and right. I've definitely had to get involved with that.
Yeah, for sure.
I am looking, so I went to Gaming History 101/lessons, and the first thing I see is this little graphic, and I'm kind of sad that I can't click on it and make it bigger, but it's console standards, and it looks like it's diagrams of hands holding controllers throughout the years.
Yes, it is. That's
awesome.
Yeah, that is our lessons page. I'm sorry you can't do that. You know what? I'll go back and update this afterwards and turn it into a hot link so we can blow it up. But yes, what you are looking at here is basically some of the earliest things I wrote for the site, some of our earliest beginning stuff. Probably most notable that people would be most interested in is Generation Gap, which literally goes through all of the home domestic consoles of the U.S. And then I branched off there and also did import consoles. And then because I had no idea where to put them, the 32X and the Virtual Boy get their own little articles.
Oh.
And then we did.
I don't think anyone know where to put those things. So
yeah, exactly. I make them all prolific too, like remembering the Virtual Boy, as if anybody does.
I have one in the back room.
Hey, congratulations! That is still one that I have not found in good enough condition to pull the trigger on, but I'm looking forward to eventually getting it.
Oh, mine's in mint condition with all the games. Like, I think except 2. I think I'm missing 2 games.
I have them all, Sean.
I know you do.
And I have them in the box, and I have a brand new one in the box, and then I have one that I play with. So
yeah, you have the one that you had to send away for, which was Waterworld.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah. So by the time I started collecting them, there was no sending away for Waterworld anymore. There was just I wasn't going to get it. And I can't remember the other one. I'm pretty sure there's only 2 games missing, because wasn't there like a total of 17 games made for it, Sid?
Well, it depends on whether you count the North American releases or you count the Japanese releases. Like, I actually think I have 17 or 18 titles, but I also have, like, for example, I have the V Tetris, which was a Japanese release. I don't remember the exact number in North America, but
as well.
To my knowledge, it's 22. 22 unique if you count the region differences.
Yeah, if you count the ones that are from, you're right. But in North America, it's less. It's like 14 or something like that. It's not that many.
Yeah,
it's not hard to get a complete North American collection, except for Jack Brothers is really tough to get, especially in the box.
Really? Okay, because I have that one.
Yeah, and one is probably.
That's a good one too.
Oh yeah, it's a good game. It's probably the most valuable one as well.
Because it's probably the best game on the system.
Yes, I would say that that's probably true.
Yeah, it was.
No Red Alert fans?
I have Red Alert. Yeah, Red Alert was fun for sure.
No.
So, Fred,
yeah.
What made you want to do Gaming History 101? Like, was it just trying to find a niche, or what was the desire behind this particular topic?
Well, technically it's a perfect storm, but I will say that it came at a culmination of a couple of things. And the first one was I used to run a video game website called Video Game Purists, which was it was me and my buddy Hefe. We did it. We were friends in college, and we decided to do this right out of college in 2008. I remember our first episode. We covered the release of GTA 4. So there you go.
Okay.
And we had gone about 100 episodes, and he, you know, as life happens, people have to drop out, and so he had to separate. And I got another co-host who was great, but things were just getting very overwhelming for me. I had no idea how deep it could get later on in life, but and so that all came to a close. And when that came to a close, at that same time, one of my favorite podcasts was also coming to a close, which was known as Retronauts, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Actually, no. I've never heard of Retronauts. I haven't. Okay.
Okay, well, real quick, it was One Up's retro podcast, and basically they have kind of come back through Kickstarter, but it was mostly started by Jeremy Parrish, but it had a lot of old guard journalists early on. There's kind of 3 known phases of it, but anyway, the third and final phase was coming to a close, and they did end it. And on it, Phil Kohler, who now works for Wired, was on there and did a call out to people that said, if you want this to keep going and things like that, you know, make your own podcast, even if it sucks, like do it. Like get out there and do your own retro stuff, because there can never be too many people doing this. And because it is such a niche concept.
And you said, okay.
And I did, yes. And that about a month later, I started Gaming History 101. And at the time, we were only doing once a month podcasts. And I didn't have anybody, so I was bringing on random special guests, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And we did some pretty interesting stuff early on. The first thing we did was like a shoot 'em up shmups, as they're called, and you either love or hate that title. But shoot 'em ups, they've always been some of my favorite genre games, also because they transcend language. So like, you know, the really good ones in Japan only you can still play because you don't need to know the language.
Exactly. Just shoot stuff.
Yes, exactly. So we did an episode all about that, and it kind of built from there. But now the website kind of plays off of a lot of different random concepts for the podcast. And the podcast is kind of how we get people into the website and into the community. And we have varied topics, but it's everything from like, I mean, what we do is mostly a development standpoint. So like we have this crazy 7-hour 2-part Sonic the Hedgehog thing where I delved into and found all of the development information on the never released Sonic Extreme and all this kind of stuff. And we broke it all down in a very, very meticulous way. So we've got stuff like that. And we've done that with many series. Actually, this coming up week, we're doing that with Gears of War because of the Gears of War Ultimate Edition. And we kind of piggyback those releases to kind of help us. But we tend to go much older. And another thing we do is definitely like cultural items. So we talk about like our favorite arcades growing up, and we get people's stories or their favorite retro game shops or the things that you used to love about them. So we do things like that. And then occasionally we do tech and various I don't know, I do stuff that I like to call list podcasts, where we just kind of go back and forth talking about like our favorite genres or whatnot. And then most recently we've started getting into development as well. So like, for example, a couple weeks ago we did the Working Designs podcast, and we talked all about all of Working Designs' great efforts bringing Japanese games over here. So we kind of bounce all over the place with that stuff. And then of course we do a game club, which is participation optional, you know, and that podcast used to be in our main list. It'll definitely be on the same feed, but now we call them extra credits, which are these little supplemental podcasts that you can either listen to if you have interest, or you can feign away from if you're not interested. And that's where the game clubs now reside. So
yeah, I noticed your podcast here, Working Designs, and I remember a lot of good titles coming out of them back in the day. What were some of the games you talked about on the podcast?
Oh, sure. On that particular podcast, we talked a lot about some of their early items, which were PC Engine CD. I'm trying to remember. I had not looked it up, but there was a series they did that if they hadn't done it, I don't think anybody would be familiar with the series in the West. Hold on. I'm just pulling up their list real quick, because the second I see it, I'll remember it. I just had a heck of a time hunting it down. Here we go.
Wasn't it something like... No, it wasn't Lunar, was it?
They did do Lunar, that I'll get to in a sec, but Exile was what I was talking about, the Exile games. These were like JRPG. The first one started as a JRPG in the PC-88 days, and then when they came to the TurboGrafx and Turbo CD, they became kind of like Zelda 2 games almost, like action RPGs. But then you're right, in the Sega CD age, they would bring us Lunar and Popsicle Mail.
I loved Lunar.
Oh, yes.
No idea.
I still like the Sega CD ones more than their PlayStation ones, even though those were great, polishing of games.
Yeah, Sega CD is where I played Lunar.
Yes.
And I think Lunar 2. Was Lunar 2 Sega CD?
Yep. Silver
Yes,
Star
I
is
thought
the
so.
first one, Eternal Blue's the second one.
Yeah, and I loved them both.
It's funny though because those two games have been remade a couple of times, like onto newer platforms, and they don't feel right.
No,
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
not the same.
But one thing I do love about Working Designs, which I talk about, and this is something I definitely want to talk about with in regards to Gaming History 101, is they were very kind, especially on those PlayStation releases, to have making-of documentaries. They have them for Lunar, Silver Star, and Eternal Blue on kind of what the original work was and how they polished it up and then brought it forward. I think they did the same with Ark the Lad. And what I do is I also collect a lot of these bonus discs from special editions that aren't readily available. You can't go buy them somewhere. They're not part of a collection anymore. And I actually put them up on our YouTube and make them available under a documentaries section. They're also under documentaries on the main website. I just paste the YouTubes in there. But we've got some stuff in there. I got the Working Designs going live soon. But for now, we've got like Alan Wake. I've got from its bonus disc. I've got like Fallout New Vegas with Obsidian and a lot of those ones. A couple of times we have to pull them down. Microsoft was none too happy that I found an old development diary of Halo that started with it on the Mac that went all the way up to when it finally came out on the Xbox.
Yeah, I remember that history.
Yes, and this video was great that I found. I found it in an old mom and pop shop. It was like a freebie from a convention, and they sold it to me for 99 cents. And it shows you Halo running on the Mac, and it shows you all the development steps. And yeah, Microsoft and Bungie did not like that. They asked me to take that down pretty quick, and we do not use advertising. Yeah, we don't use advertising, so we weren't making any money off of it. Most of the companies don't care when they find out you're not advertising. But Microsoft in this particular case, and I understand they're trying to protect their.
But that's common knowledge, is it not? That history of Halo?
Right, but it was the fact that the documentary wasn't mine. If I wanted to make my own documentary and put my own footage, that would be fine. And again, places like, ironically enough, Microsoft Game Studios and Remedy have no problem with me having Alan Wake up there. So I think it just has to do with all the hands that are in the cookie jar of Halo. But it's very rare that we have to pull something like that down. Another one that I'm going to be doing, and I doubt Konami's going to care, but we'll see, is the only way to get the making of Metal Gear Solid 4 was on a special Blu-ray. It's a 2-hour documentary made by Kojima Productions that you have to have the special edition, which is quite expensive these days. But I, of course, have it because I bought it when it came out.
Yeah, I have it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to be ripping that and making it available in 1080p for people to watch on the YouTube, just in case they want to see it. Again, I think these development things, they don't get too much traffic, but I don't really care. Like, I like that they're out there. I also, one of my favorite games of all time was Night Trap on the Sega CD, and I found a documentary for that, which we do have on the site. It's about 8 minutes, and it's more of a PR stunt, but it's fun. So yeah, but again, I just try to get as much information as we can and feature. Our motto here is basically try to cover something either that no one's covered before, or something that no one's covered quite the way you're covering it. Which is why people ask me why we haven't had like Mario reviews or things like that. Like, we'll get to it. The one thing I did do is I challenged myself to beat Super Mario Brothers 1 without warp zones, and that's a fun hour of my life that is on the YouTube that I can't get back. I must warn people in advance. There might be some swearing. We do have the explicit tag on a lot of our videos, and we just throw it on there to be safe. We just don't want anybody seeing anything they shouldn't or don't want to. So
yeah, that's
now,
fair.
Sean, I got a question for you. How did you how did you meet Fred, or how did you come up with this association with for this project, but also for OMG Nexus? How did you guys connect?
So I first met Fred, if you want to call it that, through Gamers Unscripted. He was one of our guest hosts back in December.
Okay.
Of course, Meef J, a friend of, I think, everybody, and what we call the mayor of podcasting.
Yeah.
Simply because he pretty much knows everybody. As soon as I announced that, Sid, you and I were doing Gaming History 1, or Lost Treasures. Lost Treasures of Gaming as its own podcast, of course, Meef J jumped in and said, hey, we should do a collaboration with Fred. And I'm like, hey, that's, it wouldn't work on the show simply because it's an interview show, but let's do something, right? So Fred and I just kind of hooked up and I said what would make sense. And, since we started, Fred's now been doing, he's already got the Twitch channel, of course. And so he said, hey, I'll stream whatever game you're covering. And I think it's been great. I mean, essentially, it's all Meef J's fault. He meefed his way in again. And basically, he hooked us up, said, you guys should do a collaboration together. And here we are. So, Fred, let's talk a bit about that collaboration.
Sure.
So you've done, was it 3 or 4 now?
Yes, I think we're on 4. I'll double check the YouTube page, but I do believe we are on 4 now.
Yeah, so you've done, last week, of course, you did Miner 2049er.
Yep.
And you got to level 3.
I did. I let you down, Sid. I almost got to level 4.
He was so close.
And then
that's okay. You know what? It's a tough game. It really is.
Yes, I remember it from my youth, but unfortunately I didn't practice too much. Half of the fun of Lost Treasures of Gaming every week is figuring out how I'm going to get the game in a faithful format for streaming, which is a fun challenge in and of itself.
I think the first one you did was U-Boat.
Yep.
So that was a bit interesting because that's probably the oldest one you've done so far.
And that one I had to type in.
No. So
well, I didn't type it in. A buddy of mine who works a lot with the VIC-20 typed it in. But it was, to be fair, it wasn't an emulator, but the emulator is as picky as the VIC-20 was.
So I actually typed it in because the ROM is out there.
Yeah, I know, but I thought it would be fun part of the process and so that I could talk about.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. You have to do 2 programs. So that was another thing we had to look up was how you had to, and again, you guys talk about it on your episode, but how to figure out how to do that. And then of course I try to demo that on the show proper, and I forgot some of the shortcuts for like down 3 times and things like that. I screwed it up, and I was like, oh no, okay. But luckily, we had saved it as like a batch file that would just launch, so I was safe there. But yeah, the show is live, which can have all kinds of interesting things happen.
Well, that's what's fun about it, because on the nights that I can join, it's nice interacting with you as you're doing your show.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you are an extension of this show, and I want to, be a part of that as well. I think it's important that the 2 shows have that interaction.
Yeah, and I much appreciate it. And again, I think the biggest reason I was eager to do the streaming is I am not much of a collector, and anybody who looks at my closet would probably laugh and say otherwise, but I'm more just obsessed with the experience of playing all these games. So if there's a game I haven't played before, I want to play it. And I figured your show was a great way to do both, right? Like, I had never played Rescue on Fractalus, and I was okay to various degrees, but I did save an astronaut or 2, and I managed to take off and beat level 1. That was huge for me. So,
well, you started the stream on level 4. Yeah, and then everything was shooting you down, and of course the controls, the control mapping for some reason wasn't working properly.
Yes, and I think I figured that problem out later on in time. I was talking to you, Sean, about the emulator that I use, which is a fantastic, faithful emulator down to having scan lines, but it takes some learning. Those were more complex systems, as I'm sure Sid can attest to, than we give them credit for.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes. So that was U-Boat and Rescue, and then you did Ghostbusters.
Yes, I watched that. That was fun.
That was a lot of fun, and I don't remember it being that hard.
I do. I remember that game always being hard, but like in a good way. Like I was never discouraged.
Right.
And that was my favorite scene, and I knew that those fire gargoyles would be a problem. There's a later scene in a graveyard where the fire gargoyles get upgraded to like basically cherubs with fire arrows.
I remember that scene.
Too.
Yeah. Now the scenes you were playing, did you say that was at the beginning of the game?
Near the beginning. That was level 2.
See, I just don't remember the game being that hard so fast, because I love that game, and I'm not one who likes to play a game that's super frustrating. And I played that game from start to end and loved it. I just don't remember it being that hard.
Well, and it also depends on the difficulty setting. I want to say there's 4, and I probably picked 3 out of 4. You'll have to excuse me. That's from an old, again, we started with Video Game Purists. The whole rule was we only played games on Expert. And the reason
Really?
Well, the reason we did that was for different opinions. Like people played Modern Warfare, and they had one opinion of it. But it took us 20 hours to beat that on Veteran. And we had a very different opinion, and not a negative opinion, but it was a very different experience. Maybe some would argue not as pleasant an experience. But so I still have a tendency to ramp it up a little bit, and I should have known better, but then once this feed was going on, it was like, oh, am I really going to cancel and shut down? No, let's show people that that's what these games are about. And I do like that about Lost Treasures of Gaming. Games are hard. People need to accept that, and I think their challenge is part of their draw to me, their appeal, especially the older games. And while Ghostbusters isn't that old, there was something about that scene where you had to just learn how to play and learn how to work your way around those enemies that I almost kind of wanted people to see as I evolved into finally remembering how to best take care of those characters. So
Absolutely. So those are the 4 I think you've done now. Of course, Miner 2049 we already talked about. If you were to request us to cover certain games, what would be some of the games you would like us to cover?
Sure. Well, one that I definitely already talked to you about was Jumpman.
Yes.
As a
I love
C64
Jumpman.
fan. Yes.
And you know what? I did a little bit of research, in fact, because you and I were talking about it during your show on Friday night. Yeah. You mentioned it. I immediately started looking for the creator of Jumpman. And I know somebody who's creating Jumpman Forever. Davis Sickman Jr. is doing Jumpman Forever. Jumpman Forever. And he got personal permission from, I know his last name is Glover. Randy Glover, thank you. And Davis has lost all contact with Randy Glover. He has no idea how to get a hold of him now. And it's almost like he fell off the face of the planet. Because nobody, like there's nothing about him online. You can't get any information about him. It's just like, it's the most bizarre thing in this day and age to not be able to find someone.
Yeah, but it's possible these guys know how to fall off the scope, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and my fear is that he's passed away, and that, because it's not like his name is that unique. It's not like there's a ton of them, but you know, I'm trying to track him down through some mutual friends right now, so hopefully I'll be able to find out if he's still around.
Yeah, because I remember playing Jumpman for hours on my Commodore 64. That was there are I'd say probably about 5 games on my Commodore that I lived for, and Jumpman was one of them. The other was Mr. Robot and His Robot Factory, which I know I've mentioned many times. There's just something about that game that just comes back to me. It's like, I love that game, you know, and it was one of the few games of the times where you could create your own levels.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember playing around with that and just having fun creating my own levels and just running them. But, you know, that's a very similar game to Miner 2049er. It's the same idea.
Well, and so one of the Lost Treasures we've already done in a previous segment, and so we won't do it again, but if you want to, if you're ever looking for something to stream that's a tough game, China Miner for the Commodore 64, which, again, similar to Miner 2049er in the sense of it was, you know, a platforming game, but very, very difficult. You want to talk about impossible timing and everything. I actually had a challenge during one of our game nights to see whoever got the furthest in the game, I would give a special award to, because that game is punishing. So if you really want to put, yourself through torture, download China Miner, and it was written by Ian Gray, was the developer, Interceptor Software, UK based. And having a name like Ian Gray is pretty much the same as John Smith.
Yes.
So pretty hard to track this guy down. But anyway, if you ever want to try something difficult, give that one a go.
Yeah, I'll keep that in the old pocket. There was one other one, and I might be able to put you guys in contact, but I don't know if you guys would want to do it. One of my favorite games of all time, even though it's not a good game, and I will admit this right off the bat, is Night Trap on the Sega CD. And I might have a way to put you in contact with either Tom Zito or James Riley, but that's under the very stern condition that you're interested at all in that. So, but yes, I was fascinated with this game, and
Night Trap was one of the first games to use full motion video.
Yes. Yes.
And wasn't Sewer Shark also one of those full motion video games?
Actually, they both came out at the Sega CD launch, October 15th, 1992.
Yeah.
92, yes.
Now, Night Trap, I would call that a lost treasure, because there was just something unique. The full motion video thing is really what set it off. It was the whole, I don't know, it's just Night Trap was a fun game. Well,
and we have a complete playthrough.
Yeah, well, it was not a game I ever finished, right? It was like one of those games where it was almost like, what do I do?
Yeah, you had to catch guys coming in windows, and there was no reason why. Well, and again, when people watch our playthrough, they're like, wow, this is very jarring. And I was like, well, yeah, because you got to keep jumping around to catch them.
From camera to camera.
Do a study. Yeah, like there are schedules that exist out there, but I thought that was cheating. So I played through it and managed to get to the end, but you do have to jump around, so people can't. That's the kind of the trick, right? The game prevents you from getting to know the story. And that was
because you got to leave the characters in one room to go look at another, right?
Yes.
But the game was cleverly done. I mean, you could literally follow the characters from one room to another by just flipping cameras. It was actually really brilliant the way they did it.
And believe it or not, we have an episode called Finding an Analog, and it was about the fact that Night Trap was among many other games, including Sewer Shark, that were supposed to be on a VHS console called the Nemo, made by Mattel in the late 80s. And we do a huge podcast all about that and all the games that were developed for it. So that's a fun one if you want to look up old. Imagine how often those games would break if they were VHS tapes.
Is that a console that actually never happened?
You are correct, yes. It never did happen. But there were a couple that did come out. We talk about them, and guess what? They don't withstand the test of time very well at all.
My only fear is if we had, Tom Zito and we were talking about Night Trap, is I just keep asking him about what he was thinking with that whole Night Trap Kickstarter.
I know.
And I know some of the and I know another company, and I'm not going to name the company, but there's another company, at least one company, I'm sure, maybe more, who have expressed interest in bringing Night Trap back to current day platforms, and partially as a joke, in the sense of, hey, look at what we're bringing back, but actually doing it, and unfortunately deals could never be struck because I think Tom just thinks maybe that this thing is worth, $1 million, and that bringing it back is just, so that's just some insight that I have from some industry folks who've tried to actually get it back long before the Kickstarter thing even happened. But that would be my fear, is that I'd be jabbing at him through the interview. So maybe I don't know. I have to think about that.
Well, and I was one of the unfortunate people who bid the $500 tier on the Kickstarter to get because you got a big war chest that had all the making of stuff, including all the design docs and all the early
you and
stuff.
your design docs, you just want to get your hands on those.
I know. So fortunately, it didn't succeed, and I was able to turn that $500 into PC Engine CD. So probably a much better,
a better investment.
Yeah, but yeah. So that's just a couple. But you know what? Like I said, I've loved every episode, and it's fun because I get to hear all about this game that I'm going to play, and especially if I've never seen it before. Which was the case with both U-Boat and Rescue on Fractalus. Then, it's like you kind of know about these games, but you've never seen them, and then you plug them in and just experiencing them for the first time. It's just, I don't know, that's just very fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're doing that and that you're finding some fun in doing that as well on your side. And that's the whole thing with Lost Treasures of Gaming is we're trying to, bring to surface games that it's kind of twofold, right? Some of them are games that were good in the time and were not necessarily unpopular. They might have been very popular for the time, but just the current generation has no idea about those games. Or it's a case of a game that really, like in the case of U-Boat, it would not have gotten a large, sort of following. It wouldn't have gotten big distribution except through the magazine. And to be quite honest, it's certainly not the best game ever made, but it certainly was a treasure for me just because of the history with my father and the things that I talked about in the show. But it's just kind of interesting partially it was to bring to light the concept of the type-in program and that sort of thing. So, we're trying to educate people at the same time as well through some of these game experiences because I think there's such a generation now that just has no idea how easy they have it when they launch a game from their cell phone with the tap of a finger. Just, you're talking sort of before about it's a challenge, even with an emulator, sometimes to get, programs to load. Like in the case of U-Boat, you actually have to, load in the graphic stuff first and then load a separate program in order to fit everything into the limited memory. Like people just have no concept at how different computers and platforms are. I mean, sure, cartridges in the Atari 2600 were easy, but certainly on the computing platforms, it could be more complex, and it was in some cases to get some of these things running. So, we're trying to educate people at the same time as bring some of these fun old games to light.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Fred, why don't you tell people how they can follow you and how they can check out your Twitch streaming and your website?
Sure. So the easiest and best way is gaminghistory101.com. That's where everything is centrally located. However, if you are a fan of the live items, the two places you can find those are our Twitch channel is twitch.tv/GH101, and that's where we do the Twitch streams. Mostly what's on the books is every Friday night, Lost Treasures of Gaming's at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then once we finish with that, I do tend to play more hardcore games and whatnot, or older games that have me using a little more adult language. So that's not approved for all ages, but Lost Treasures of Gaming always will be. So that's why you shouldn't be discouraged when you see the mature rating. I just put that on the channel so that nobody ever clicks on it and is surprised. But during Lost Treasures of Gaming, it will be clean. I have to say that on youtube.com/gaminghistory101, that's a different person. Same thing with, I believe, twitch.tv/gaminghistory101. I didn't understand the concept of squatters on free accounts when I first made the .com. I figured once I had the .com, I was safe. Not so much the case.
Not so much.
But you know what? It's a younger guy who's about 15 trying to learn about old school stuff like the Famicom disk system. So I figure, let him be. He's doing a good thing there. But the other place is we are live with our podcast. A history podcast is even more difficult live, but we do it, which is on allgames.com. Every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. and we do Eastern Standard Time, and we do have a chat and everything. We have a pretty decent turnout for the chatters, so you'll be with a bunch of people. So
a live podcast, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's fun. The one other thing, and I promise I'll be quick, that I do want to pitch that's kind of along this same vein is starting in early September, I will be starting to release a series called Cron CD that I'm doing where I am playing every single CD-based video game from 1988 when the PC Engine CD comes out, straight through in chronological order, and putting them together in little hour-long things which show you playing the game, and it kind of does not really a review, but more of just like a look at what the trends were and kind of how games were progressing. So I do capture on an emulator, but I do have the hardware itself in the games, and I play them. And what I've been basically doing is the community's been great about helping me kind of get in games and then swap them out for the next one. And it's kind of a buy and sell thing on eBay, but it's working itself out with a limited budget. So so that's in the pipe right now, but that'll start coming out on a regular basis alongside Lost Treasures of Gaming. So something to watch for.
And this week, of course, you're doing the Twitch stream on Thursday night because of PAX Prime.
That's correct. I fly out early Friday morning, so I'm going to do the Twitch stream this Thursday, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then once it's done, promptly going to bed. And you know what? There's a chance I might be playing this, China Minor.
China Minor. Now,
Yeah.
if you do play that, I will warn everybody now that no matter what happens, there will be expletives in that. So that will
Actually, I was pretty good with Minor being self-policing. I do have a young daughter, and I keep it clean, so.
Not going to happen with China Minor.
Okay, fair enough.
It's going to be very difficult. You are going to be very frustrated. But, your reward will be that you will have my undying respect if you get even to like level 4 or something.
There you go. So
There we go.
Leave it up to you, Fred, which title you do, because on the OMG Hour, the Lost Treasure this week was Singularity. So either you can do Singularity or do China Minor, whatever you'd like to do. So we'll leave it up. It'll be a surprise.
Yeah, so let my wife decide which one she wants to hear me yelling at more. So, but yeah.
And on Twitter, how can people follow you?
Oh, I am at Spidersvenom. That's SPYDERSVENOM. I should point out I'm on multiple podcasts, so that's going to be kind of an overall feed. I also am not self-policing. I tend to be kind of a very critical person of all media, but definitely games press, so that's something to let people know. If you want something a little lighter, The Real GH101. So at The Real GH101 is our Twitter for the website. So
awesome. Fred, thank you.
Things in your life.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Fred.
Yeah, thanks, Fred.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you very much for the show. I love it.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. Of course, as Fred just said, tune in every Friday night to twitch.tv/GH101 for a stream of whatever game we cover each week. This week, of course, being Thursday night, and we don't know what we're going to cover this week. It'll be a surprise, whichever one he chooses. You can follow this show, of course, on Twitter at Lost Treasures OG, and I can be followed on Twitter as Zion
And, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Sid Bolton. That's Sid with a Y. And if you want to send us an email, maybe have a suggestion for what we should cover, or just want to give us any feedback, you can do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. And if you want to read the show notes for this show or any other show, or you want to read our reviews or listen to other podcasts, you can do so at our main website, which is omgnexus.com.
And of course, if you want to get a preview of what we'll be talking about next week, be sure to listen to the next episode of the OMG Hour for another buried classic. And that's it for Lost Treasures of Gaming. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back again, hopefully, next week.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.